So Pauline Hopkins is a fascinating character. She is, I would argue, a typical Bostonian in that she loved Boston, but she also seemed to have this wide variety of interests. She's living in Boston, traveling out to Cambridge. And then, as now, there are lots of talks, right, being held at MFA, at Harvard, at MIT. Hopkins would go to these talks, and she would, see Professor, so-and-so giving a talk about, hieroglyphics that he's discovered in, Egypt, that kind of thing. But she was really invested in racial uplift and in using all of the tools at her disposal, to try and convey to not only African Americans, but also the larger American public that Black culture, right, African culture is vivid, it's dynamic, it's compelling. There were, businessmen in particular who were invested, similar to today, invested in, helping the race uplift itself. So they invested in and created a publishing company called the Cooperative Publishing Company based in downtown Boston, and they were responsible for publishing the Colored American magazine. And that is the magazine that Hopkins was editor of. The magazine basically sought to be kind of like, I think I would describe it as kind of like a Life magazine, kind of a proto version of Life magazine for African Americans, around the turn of the 20th century. So lots of fiction, poetry, articles, news things, travel, vignettes, all sorts of really cool things. And then fiction, right, by Hopkins. The novel is called Of One Blood, The Hidden Self. So it has this really fascinating semicolon, right, subtitle. The main character is Ruel Briggs, and he's a light-skinned African-American man who is passing as white. He's at Harvard, he's a medical student. So he has this friend, Aubrey, and Aubrey tells him, I have this excavation that I'm running in Meroe. So would you go and be in charge of this excavation? So Ruel says yes. He ends up getting kind of kidnapped or drugged, but he's somehow hidden in this pyramid, which it turns out he is the long-lost king of this hidden society that has been underneath this pyramid. And so when you actually go into the pyramid and you see the hidden society, it's this really wonderful proto-Wakanda society. And when I share this with my students lose their mind, because they're like, wait, we thought that, that Black Panther was the first time that anyone had ever conceptualized of, this complicated, complex African civilization. And no, Pauline Hopkins is doing it in 1903. And then when I physically bring them over here to the MFA to see, in particular, the large sculptures of Nubian figures and then some of the stelae of the Candace figures, they are just struck with, first of all, the size of the figures and the heft and the clear Africanness of the figures they're struck with. So reading someone like Hopkins, coming here to the MFA to see the objects that she's talking about, right, gives you a very different understanding of literature and fiction and fiction writing, right? Hopkins had never left the United States. But she is saying to fellow African Americans, this is within your possibility. That it's not just whites who can travel and, write fiction and create art. It's also, African Americans who can do this as well.